Oliver from Rugby League, in my opinion, here, joined today by a very special guest, professional wrestler Robbie Eagles. How are you today, man?
I'm very good, Ollie. Thanks for having me on the show.
It's an absolute pleasure, man. First of all, I love the kit you're wearing. We're going to be talking about those boys a fair bit today. Your 2016 singlet, the mighty Cronulla Sutherland Sharks. We'll be talking about that game as well. Don't you worry about it. But Robbie, first, obviously, as I said, you're a professional wrestler. There is going to be some crossover here with some rugby league fans who may not be aware of your work. I was going to do a little spiel at the start where I might run down your accolades and that I've seen and what I've seen of you. But you know what? I thought, let's just leave it to the man himself. So, Robbie, tell us a bit about your professional wrestling career, where it's taken you and where you're currently at now.
Yeah, so I've been professionally wrestling for about 13 years. I started in March 2008, predominantly within New South Wales for the first couple of years, and then started branching out to other states across Australia later on. And what most people know me for now is my work in Japan as part of the New Japan Pro Wrestling roster, which is an international company, as I've done tours with them in the US and the UK as well. But I've been all over. I've wrestled in Malaysia, I've wrestled in Singapore, I've wrestled in the Philippines, I've wrestled in New Zealand. So I am what people call an internationally renowned pro wrestler. Diehard Cronulla Sharks fan, as we've spoken about before, the podcast off air. And, I've represented that in a lot of the wrestling costumes or wrestling gear, as we call it. I've donned the Cronulla Sharks blue, black and white many times. Sometimes not in victory, sometimes in victory, kind of like the Cronulla Sharks themselves. But yeah, I was just one of those people that was, as a kid, young and watching it on TV on Foxtel here in Australia, and said, I'm going to do it one day. And then, Bob's your uncle. I'm doing it professionally for almost 14 years now, and going to keep kicking as long as I can.
Mate, that's absolutely awesome. I mean, you bring up New Japan, as you said, an international company. Some would argue the best company in the world, especially with the best wrestlers. What's the best match that you've had so far in your career? And is it in New Japan? It might not be.
Yeah, well, this is like a bit of an argument between people who watch my matches and like myself being in them. But I'd have to kind of go with like the common one that a lot of people would put up as the pedestal is my series of matches with Will Ospreay, which have both been in Australia and in New Japan. Specifically, probably the one where we wrestled for the IWGP Junior Heavyweight title in Festival Hall in Melbourne. So that was our fourth match in our series, and that's the last singles match we've had against each other. That just had the most kind of attention on it. It was my first opportunity at the Junior Heavyweight title in New Japan, and it was on home soil. And although I'm not from Melbourne, a lot of my wrestling career grew up in Melbourne. So, we had people from all over the country come to that show because, it was kind of a one-off tour for New Japan. They only had been to the country once before that. So people came in droves to support me, which was incredible. And although I didn't come out the winner in that one, I think I gained a lot more fans off the loss and showing my heart and determination through that match. Which is funny because people only found out recently on another podcast that I tore my MCL the week before. So I went into my biggest match of my career on one leg, basically. So, not great for me, but I did the best that I could. And I could say as an easy excuse, maybe that's why I didn't win the title that night. But I don't want to chalk it up to that. Will was just a better wrestler. And we've gone on to be teammates since. And yeah, that kind of like really any of those matches with Ospreay really set my career into the motion that it's in now. So yeah, I'd probably say that's my best match.
Yeah, so last wrestling question before we move on to the rugby league stuff. Where are you currently at now with your wrestling career, and how do you see it going in the future?
I was fortunate enough to go back to Japan in October of 2020 and then do a tour for the Best of the Super Juniors, which is like the biggest, most prolific tournament for junior heavyweights or cruiserweights, as a lot of wrestling fans would know our division. And I was the only foreign representative amongst all Japanese competitors. And that's the first time that's ever really happened. So I was not only representing Australia and my other home country, because I'm half Filipino too, but I was also representing the rest of the world basically in that tournament. So I did that last year. came back December, did my quarantine, and I've been at home since. So I've just been, going up against the best in Australia for the last 6 months. Fingers crossed I'll get my way back to Japan to compete with those guys again, because I feel like I've evolved further since competing with the best here in Australia. I've traveled to Perth, I've traveled to Melbourne a few times, and there's some stuff lined up in the future where I'm going to hit some other states as well. But it all just depends on timing and stuff like that. So I'm just kind of taking it match by match at the moment, training as hard as I can, being as prepared as I can for whatever comes my way in this post-pandemic world that we live in, and actually enjoying the fact that I'm home for basically a full season of rugby league.
Yeah, that is definitely a positive. But we'll get on to the rugby league chat now. First thing I want to know, did you grow up playing rugby league at all?
I didn't really play rugby league in like a competitive fashion. High school was mostly where it was like, afternoons we'd go to a park near one of the boys' houses and just kind of kick the footy around and play some scrimmage games, like nothing really serious. Lots of fights would break out, of course, as teenagers would do in high school, but nothing where anyone got really hurt or anything like that. But yeah, so I played, I think, 1 or 2 games representative for my high school. But like I wasn't great and I was a bit sheepish, so I'd get the ball and throw it away straight away. I didn't really want to take any tackles because I was generally the smallest kid on the team. And then I did try playing for a rep team that a friend of mine played for. I went to one training session as like a 15-year-old, and I couldn't walk for 3 days after it. So I was like, I don't know about this sport for me. So it was mostly just watching it as a fan, to be honest. I'd like to give it a crack now, but unfortunately, if I got hurt playing rugby league, it would kind of impact my career and my job. So I got to be careful about that, as much as I'd like to do it on free weekends.
Yeah, well, the Cronulla Sharks, how did you come to support them?
I really don't know how it started. It kind of went when I changed primary schools. Everyone that I was friends with at the next primary school was just by turn a Cronulla Sharks fan. And then like some family friends were also Cronulla Sharks fans. And my half brother was also a Cronulla Sharks fan. So it's kind of from so many different directions, but no one ever like sat me down and went, you're watching this, you're supporting this team. I didn't really have that influence. I do remember going to a game when I was like maybe 7 or 8 years old. And that's when I really became a fan. And I had a pretty interesting experience because MC Hammerhead was there, and I gave him the ball, and I was like, "Oh, sign my ball." But he didn't have the appropriate handwear to sign a ball. He just had like this mitten kind of thing. So he couldn't really communicate to me. So he grabbed the ball and chucked it back at me, and I wasn't expecting it, and just falconed it right in my face, like straight to the face as like a 7-year-old. And I was like, oh, okay, that sucks. And I'm pretending not to cry and walk back and be like, yeah, that was a great experience. Let's do that again. But the game was good.
And that was the first big bump of your wrestling career.
Exactly.
Yeah. So who was your favorite player growing up?
David Peachey was definitely one of the ones that I was drawn to. But I think Matt Rogers was the GOAT for me. He was just the guy that like everyone clamored to. There were so many different players like throughout the years of my fandom. And of course, like as I was growing up, there's years where I was more consistent with watching the footy, and there was years where I wasn't as consistent with watching the footy. But I tried to keep up. Kamali was another one when he was playing for the Sharks. A lot of the times I was always endeared to the smaller player. So I generally was drawn to them. I just remember Peachey was a superstar, so like everyone loved him. And then Matt Rogers was my guy. And then I actually had a friend that's a pro wrestler who's now in the WWE that was on, I don't know if he was on the same series of Survivor as Matt Rogers or if he was on the one before it, but there was like a weird connection of Matt Rogers being on Survivor and me being like, oh, that's the same Matt Rogers I grew up watching. So like, he's still a guy that I like look to for inspiration. And he's definitely probably the one that I draw back to as like growing up my favorite player.
Yeah, awesome. Now, I'm asking this as your favorite Cronulla Sharks memory growing up. So don't touch 2016 yet. We'll get there. But as a fan, growing up, what's your favorite Cronulla Sharks memory?
Oh man, like that's more difficult because of all the knocks that I've taken in pro wrestling, similar to some of the boys dealing with concussions in the NRL now. My memory is so shot with like the stuff long ago. It would mostly just be from being at the games at Shark Park, to be honest. Like any time that I got to be there as a youngster, it didn't matter if we won or lost. I just had like a great time being with all the other people in the blue, black, and white, people waving the flags, singing Up Cronulla. Especially on the wins, of course.
Yeah.
They were probably my favorite moments. Just because as a kid, like sometimes I didn't really understand how the game worked still because my brain was still developing. So I was like, it was all going over my head. I think there was a few years back, so it's probably still within my 20s. There was an Auckland Nines where we just thrashed a bunch of teams.
Yeah.
And I remember winning a bunch of money on sports bet off that and being like, not only is this great for like a fandom point of view, but I'm, making some coin off it. So that's something that sticks out to me as well.
Yeah, well, that Auckland Nines tournament, I think it probably would have been 2015 when they made the final, because I remember in the 2014 NRL season, South Sydney won the comp, Cronulla finished last on the ladder, and then in the 2015 Auckland Nines, they versed each other in the final. And I think it came down, I think it went to extra time or something. So, yeah, they didn't win that one. I should know off the top of my head, really. It was only a few years ago. I think South Sydney won it. I'm not too sure. But anyway, we now move.
Yeah, I don't think the Sharks won.
Yeah. Otherwise, you'd remember it. Well, speaking about a Cronulla Sharks win that you do remember, we'll get onto it now. The 2016 NRL Grand Final, when I actually messaged you to come on, you replied and actually gave me a little sneak peek into the story about your 2016 NRL Grand Final. You were in the crowd. You had the blue, black and white face paint on. Tell me a bit about, I guess, the week leading up to the Grand Final for one, and your sort of hopes and what you were thinking the day of the Grand Final itself, the match itself, and how you're feeling afterwards.
It's an incredible memory, one that like no matter how many knocks I take or how many times I'm dropped on my head in pro wrestling, I'm always going to remember it because it was something that I never thought I would experience, especially being a full-blown adult at this point. You just go through so many seasons of heartbreak and you're just kind of like, yeah, well, I'm what people call a Cronulla Sharks tragic fan, we're there no matter what, but people are like, they're not going to win, they're not going to win. It's like, yeah, whatever. I remember being at a wedding with my now wife, I think for one of her family members. And we were at the reception after the ceremony, and we're like a bunch of us were watching it was either like the semis or the quarters on someone's phone, like just around a table. And the Sharks won that and kind of started securing their place like at potential finalists. And that's when at the wedding, we went and jumped on and spent a bunch of money on tickets for the finals, not even with them guaranteed to be in it at this stage. So there was still one more game to go. And I just remember, I'm never going to go to another grand final anyway, probably. So like, let's just do it now. And then when everything started leading up and they got into the finals, I was like, holy shit, like this is incredible. And I didn't really care where my seats were. I just wanted to be a part of that atmosphere. The funny thing about that week, I had a match the night before against the guy from WA, and he unfortunately brought a flu with him from Perth. So I got pretty sick the day of the game. Like I was snotty as hell, real written off. But I think the adrenaline of knowing of what I was going to got me through it.
Yeah.
So I didn't really have as many beers as I would have wanted to. I didn't have much like pies at the footy, or like I kind of, once I was in my seat, I was kind of like, I'm not moving from this seat because I can't really do too much. And the face paint hid how pale I was underneath that. So once the game was done, man, like that whole experience, especially those last like couple of minutes, we were in panic mode, right? With Melbourne chasing the ball. Like that was so scary. But then Fafita's performance in that game too, holy cow. I remember that distinctly and jumping off my seat, seeing him get over the try line. I thought that was incredible. My heart was pounding from the first minute to the last. And it's just one of those memories you'll never forget in your life. No matter, like, it's up there with my wedding. It's up there with like my big wrestling matches, with my first ever wrestling match. It's up there with meeting some of the greats in my industry. It's an incredible experience to have been a part of. And, a lot of people would still look back at it and be like, mid-season, start of the season, they're saying the Sharks aren't going to be anywhere in the finals because that was just what everyone knew. But we made it, we won it, and it was one of those. I don't watch games on replay much. It was one of the ones that I watched on replay several times and still enjoyed it like just as much as I did in the crowd.
Yeah, well, you speak about people not actually expecting Cronulla to win the comp. As I was alluding to before, 2014, so that was 2 seasons before they won the comp. They won the wooden spoon. So, to make that rapid ascent, I guess you could say, is just absolutely nuts. Well, we'll move forward now, still sticking with the Sharks, but to more recent times. What are your thoughts on, I guess, how their 2021 has gone thus far?
It's been a strange one, man. Like the start wasn't really the smoothest sailing, but right now I feel like we're getting into a better space. The game against the Panthers surprised the hell out of me. And the kind of unjustly thing with my schedule is I take classes at the Pro Wrestling Academy here in Sydney on Friday nights. So Friday night games are quite hard for me to catch. And that was one of those ones where I was like, I'll just have to catch the replay and try and stay spoiler free. And then I got a notification on my phone that was like, it was from KO Sports, and it said 48-0 rubbing of, and I think they were talking about the last game that the Panthers had against the Sharks or something. Like I didn't really read the context, and I just read that. I went, I've been spoiled the game. God damn it. I got home, turned on the telly, and I saw the last minute, and it was 19-18 Sharks way. And I was like, what? So I stayed up till like past midnight to watch the replay that night because I was so amped from the fact that we beat the leaders of the comp, which was so surprising. And we even have some players that, weren't in the side, guys like Townsend and a few others. But man, there's some star players on that team that get so unsung from the general mainstream fans of the NRL. Guys like Connor Tracy and Nakora, they're always incredible. Always. Even Trindle. I think Trindle plays great. I think the first time I really noticed him was last season when he came in and filled some spots when some of the boys were out. He's ridiculously good. And then when you throw Johnson in there too, now that he's back and healthy, easily has become one of my all-time favorite players. I didn't watch much of him when he was on the Warriors side, but now that he's a Sharky through and through, he's been fantastic. So I'm super surprised with our side. I'm eagerly watching each game now and going, hey, we might not be number one, but we're still going to vie for a top 8 spot at this point.
Yeah, well, now looking a little bit towards the future for Cronulla 2022, a new coach in Craig Fitzgibbon coming in. Chad Townsend's just signed with the Cowboys, your long-term halfback, your premiership winning halfback. And Sean Johnson's future seems to not be at the Sharks based off of recent interviews where he said, if any team out there needs a halfback, come get me. Reports were earlier in the year they offered him, I believe it was $400K a season to re-sign him, and that didn't work out. So heading forward into 2022, I mean, what's it looking like for you? New coach coming in, seemingly both halves on the outer. Are you a bit pessimistic, we might say, or optimistic with the new regime?
I'd like to be more optimistic than anything else, just because we've been through so much crap in previous seasons that I'd rather than write it off already, I'd like to just go, look, maybe it's not ideal. When all the stuff happened with Morris too, I wasn't the happiest with that because it was just it just seemed like it was all stuff that didn't really need to happen the way it happened. But what can you do? I'm just a fan. Even if I voice my concerns, it's not going to change anything because it's all about finances and how the management's going and the board of directors and all that stuff. It goes way above all of us. So you just got to hope that they have the team's best interest at the end of the day. And, losing Townsend is a bit sad. And he and I have been connected on Twitter. And I've tried to, edge my way into being on his podcast at some point, but it hasn't quite worked out. So seeing him go is a bit sad because he's just been a nice guy as well and a great player. And then, yeah, the potential of losing Johnson is, I think, a detriment. So I wish that we would have tried to hold on to him a bit tighter. But there's a lot of young players coming up, like the ones I just mentioned, and many more, who I think are going to be our future and are going to do really, really well in seasons to come. So, yeah, I'm just like any other season for the Cronulla Sharks. You just got to look at it as bright as you can, because if you put yourself as like, yeah, they're not going to win, what's the point of watching, right? It doesn't make watching the footy any fun. So I'm just going into it hoping for the best, hoping everyone stays healthy, and hoping the team's as cohesive as possible, including from your coaching and management perspective. And yeah, like as long as they don't change their colors or don't change where they come from, then I'll be happy.
That's awesome. I love the optimism, and you definitely need to get on Chad Townsend's podcast before he moves to North Queensland at the end of this year or next year, whenever he moves, because obviously you're a massive Sharks fan, and I know from little interactions I've had with him that he's a wrestling fan, because I remember would have been a bit over a year ago now, he put out his wrestling starting 13 as like a rugby league lineup. And myself, and I know a couple of other pages, then, all right, we're up for the challenge. And we put our sides together and compared it to his. So I know that he is a bit of a fan. And a couple of times I've seen on his Instagram, he's done Stone Cold Steve Austin impersonations. So I think that would be absolutely awesome. So, I mean, if Chad Townsend somehow comes across this and is listening to this, you got to get the man on your podcast. You got to get Robbie Eagles on your podcast. But anyway, Robbie, before you finish up today, look, I just want to ask you, share your socials, where people can find you, and how can people watch your matches?
Yeah, so people can find me on pretty much everything, Instagram, Twitter mostly, at Robbie Eagles _. That's ROBBIEEAGLES _. And to watch my matches locally, I've been wrestling my home promotion here in Australia. That's been the place where I started and where I continue to wrestle whenever I am in Australia, is Pro Wrestling Australia. We are streaming live on Fight TV, which is a free app to download. Some of the shows are actually for free available now on that app, so you can watch some of the back catalogue. And whenever we're on at the Factory Theatre in Marrickville or Max Watts in the Entertainment Quarter, those shows are streamed live. Otherwise, when I am back in Japan, people can catch me on newjapanworld.com, which is a subscription service to watch the best pro wrestling in the world, I think, and as you kind of touched on as well. And that's only like, it's just a little bit over $10 a month, and you get more than your fair share. Shows are streamed live. There's English commentary when it's available, and there's a back catalogue of matches for some of people's favorite wrestlers from places like WWE and AEW now. But that's where they kind of really set their self into the pro wrestling industry. It's where they cemented themselves as a superstar. So you get to see where these people came from, and you'll get to see those big matches that I spoke about earlier. So what else could you ask for?
Yeah, definitely. Well, at the very least, guys, get on YouTube, Robbie Eagles, maybe Robbie Eagles versus Will Ospreay. But thank you so much, Robbie, for jumping on today and sharing your love of the Cronulla Sutherland Sharks. And best of luck to the Sharks and to yourself for the rest of the year.
Thank you so much, man. It's been a pleasure to be on this podcast and talk some footy.
And thank you to you guys, of course, listening or watching at home. Before we leave, a quick word from our sponsor, Champ Mouthguards.